this form of skin cancer called malignant melanoma back in 2007. And at that time, my life was that I was a pharmaceutical sales rep. And I was working with Abbott Laboratories, which is a worldwide company. And I was selling medicines into a community for nephrology that had people that were dying all the time because it was end-stage renal disease. The medicine I was selling was for people who had no longer had kidney function. And so I was operating at that level where I was truly understanding what was going on and the dynamic of the medical community. And I'd also had 16 years of experience selling psychiatric medicine as well. And how this all comes together is that when my husband was diagnosed with cancer, I realized, looking back into that experience of the 8 years that he was diagnosed with cancer before ultimately he passed away from cancer in 2014, that there was no support there for caregivers. And I was going to the world-renowned hospitals for cancer, such as Duke University Medical Center, that draws people, medical professionals from all over the world, and Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center as well. And I went through that 8 years without truly having any kind of support, and it really was almost my undoing in a lot of ways. Yeah. Flash forward to 2014, I was working for a company in Canada, which was actually a French company called Servier, and then a Japanese company called Atsuka, and selling psychiatric medicine. And even then, there was no discussion of grief, and I had yet to understand grief. And so my husband was diagnosed in 2014, and 6 weeks later, he passed away from cancer in May into June. And that's when I was hit with the full ramification of what grief. And so with my background and my experience, my personal experience, and then my professional experience, I truly realized that the emotions and the impact in so many different areas of my life, there just wasn't what was needed out there for me. And it was a huge, of course, life-changing experience. And so I had a really good friend of mine in Canada who had gone through alcoholism, and he had joined the Alcoholics Anonymous program and experienced an amazing healing and change in his life from it. And David said, you can't find the support that you're looking for. And I was going online. So I was doing everything that I knew as the person who I was, being very capable of finding support and help for me. I couldn't find it. And I was like, there is something majorly wrong with this picture. What is going on? I can't be the only widow out there who's going through the level of trauma that I am, trying to find, a community to help me. And so David said, if you can't find what you're looking for, why don't you come and sit into one of our open meetings at Alcoholics Anonymous and see how we do things, and then maybe you can figure something out. So I went to one of his programs, and it was an absolutely life-changing experience. I was seeing people that were coming from the depths of despair, of total desolation in their lives, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And they were bonding together with a common theme of what they were all experiencing, and they were coming from all different dynamics of life. I mean, alcoholism is a great equalizer. Okay. So is grief. Okay. And so I was seeing the parallels of how this could fit into the structure of what this program was. And I left that meeting totally changed. It totally changed my life. And so at that time, there was a lot of flux and transition and things that were going on for foreign nationals. And I was pulled back into the United States. And I landed in Charlotte, North Carolina in 2015. And I started, David was like, why don't you just call it Grief Anonymous? I mean, don't reinvent the wheel. And I'm like, you're right. And so I moved back to the United States. I was in Charlotte, and I started looking online, and I realized nothing. I thought, well, I'll go find that. And it didn't exist. And so I decided I've got the wherewithal I've got the intention behind me. I have all of this experience. I'm almost like the fly on the wall of everything that's going on to realize that there's a huge void and a gap. And so I just decided to create it for myself. And I created it because I needed it. And so when I made the intention to do this, I started doing some speaking, and I had a wonderful friend who owned a coffee shop, and she was doing discussions. She was having women coming in and talking about their experiences and how they were transforming it into creating something for their lives. And so she asked me to come and talk. And this was in 2016 in the springtime. And so I gave this discussion about what I wanted to do. I set the intention about Grief Anonymous, and at the same time, being from the business community and it being a highly litigious community, being the medical community and the pharmaceutical community, I know that I had to establish the bedrock. So I trademarked Grief Anonymous. I turned it into a business structure, knowing that I was going to turn it into a charity. And so I developed the framework of what I needed to do legally and business wise. And then I started going at it from the emotional, spiritual side and talking about my heart, where it was and what needed to happen. And so that was the discussion that I had in that coffee shop. And I had several people come forward after my discussion who had just been seriously impacted by a loss. And one of them was Rita Calberry. And she said, I want to help you. I just lost she was a Canadian too, and she was living in North Carolina. And so we had that bond as well. And she said, I want to help you. So she came over, and at my kitchen table, we sat down and started talking about how to create the local group there in Charlotte. And her suggestion to me was, why don't you start a small group online on Facebook, and we can start sharing our ideas and our concepts and the structure, and we can bring ideas in order to be able to develop the program. So I'm a very highly spiritual person. I believe in God. So you're going to hear a lot of this conversation because a lot of the spiritual side of this I haven't really discussed yet, but if people are wanting to discuss it, we will. It was just one of those divine intervention moments that we decided to create the online group, and that was our intention, was to get ideas for the local program. And what happened was, within 6 months, we had 4 million people that were viewing our page on Facebook, and we were adding thousands of people every month to the groups. And so, and it just mushroomed from there. And so at the time that I was building the baseline structure of the organization from a business standpoint, plus sharing into and creating the paradigm of our whole program and what it's about, which is absolutely key, especially now, which we can talk about. And then just putting in the effort. We didn't even have time to work on the local meetings because it was mushrooming online. And we realized there was a huge amount of gain and positivity about that, because we were actually able to reach into people's lives who were stuck on the couch, who could not leave their home, who were in such desperate need for any kind of support or connectivity, that we were able to reach them at that level. And we realized that we tapped into something that was really becoming a real dynamic within the online community. And we were one of the first groups that got started. There were probably 3 or 4 other groups out there on Facebook. But one of the things that I recognized about the problems within those groups was that they had no structure, and they didn't have a defined way of moving forward. And I realized that there was a great need for that. And that's why Grief Anonymous came into the picture, and why I think we've become so successful. And when I say we, I really mean we, because this started with me as the founder, and as me putting this together, and with divine intervention and all the things that came to us. We didn't develop this just with what I thought needed to happen. It was a collective force within the administrators that had gone through so many different experiences and from so many different facets of life. And we recognized that this works really well. And so then it just kind of went from there. And then we also understood that it takes a village to help people, and we were just one avenue of support, but that we realized that the people in our groups needed 10 things. When we were offering one thing, they needed 10. So that's why we created the Grief Resource Network in a very non-competitive fashion, because what we wanted to do is bring the community together for the purposes of our membership, and to be able to offer them all kinds of ways that they are being impacted by their grief, and not just from a support situation, but from so many different angles. And that has literally been 3 years in the making. It's almost like we built a B-52 bomber, and this past week was the first week we've really got it up and flying. It's been that long, and the financial and the emotional and the time investment that people have put into this is more than I'll ever be able to pay any of them back
let me just stop you there, because it sounds amazing that you've taken this. Let's face it, literally the most difficult part of the human existence is losing somebody that you love. That is almost the most difficult part of the entire human existence, and yet you've taken that and transformed it into something which has not only bettered your own life, but has helped bettered the life of tens of thousands of people who are experiencing that same trauma which you experienced. Just to give some, a lot of the people listening in are very curious about building communities which are safe places for people. Whether it's you've dealt with grief, others are building safe places for other reasons. Could you tell us a little bit about what that structure looks like today of your Grief Anonymous and Grief Network? And then I would also, anyone who's listening in, some of you have submitted questions already, but if you think of anything you'd like to ask right now, just put it into the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get Holly to answer as many as possible. So if you could explain to us the current, how it looks, that'd be great.
Yes. Okay, so it's real important. This was one of the things that I felt like it was really, really, really important, is the structure to our program. We are inclusive of all people, regardless of the backgrounds of their race, their religious beliefs or lack of, or anything of that nature. All people are welcome to come into Grief Anonymous. And we have also created what we call the cardinal rules of communication engagement. Because to be inclusive of all people and welcoming of all people, it has to be done in such a way that it's done in a peaceful way, where there's respect for other people and it's a non-judgment. And so, but in the same token, we do not want to cut people off from the very things that help them the most, which is their spirituality, which is their belief system, and all of those things. And so everybody has to be able to come in and be who they are. So we are not stifling of that. What we ask of people is, if they are discussing those things, they have to use the words I, me, and my when discussing it, so that they feel free to express themselves. And then we have the cardinal rules of engagement, which is our number one rule, is the golden rule, which means that you talk to people and you react to people and you connect with people the way you would want them to do that for you. And then we've also made sure that we stay true to our goals. We do not get political in nature, so that we leave those aspects of the work that we do out, so that people can come in and truly feel that there's a safe space for them. And that is really critical, because you have to define this aspect of your organization if you are truly wanting to help the masses. Because if, the only people that truly don't feel comfortable in this environment are the ones that come in and want to impress on others. They want to do those things. And so in these simple, basic structural rules that we have are wide open and out there to see. So when the bad apple does come in, the bad apple leaves, because bad apples aren't allowed to stay in and infect the rest of our group and create chaos and drama and non-inclusion. And so does that help you?
Yeah, completely. And in fact, that really links in nicely with something somebody else has already answered prior to this discussion. And that is, you've answered it a little bit, but I'd love to hear even more about the way you do it, which is, how do you maintain it as a safe space? Like, how do you police the bad apples, as you call them? And how do you make sure that the people who are coming in really belong and deserve and are loving each other in the spaces that you have?
We have, the way that you do that is that you do not connect individually to individual people, and you don't consider that individual person's opinion more important than the goal and the core of what we do. So when that person tries to pass through that process because they think their opinion is more entitled to be out there than our rules, then they leave. And we have no problem with that. You have to be able to say goodbye, and that is it, and you are no longer allowed to be a part of our program. And that's truly, it's there's no complicated aspect about that. We don't just toss people out randomly. We let them have a warning. We send reminders, and when they joining our group is the process of them agreeing to these rules. If these rules are broken, then these rules are reminded to that person. And if that person isn't willing to adhere to that rule, then they have to leave. And so it's really about discipline from the standpoint of the administrators to hold true to the ideals of what we are about and what we are doing.
Let me ask you this, because you mentioned, you've got over, I believe it's 70,000 people in these various different groups right now. And, there's one of you, you've already mentioned your amazing team. How do you structure the team? How do you structure these administrators, and how are they chosen to kind of represent you and what you're achieving with Grief Anonymous?
Okay, so how do I choose the team? Well, the way that our program is created is that we have, in the beginning, our tenants. We have the 10 tenets of Grief Anonymous, and the last tenet is about giving back, because we understand that the whole process is about moving forward into helping others, and by helping others, we are able to help ourselves. That's the number one thing. Okay. And then, hold on just a second.
No worries. Time for a refreshment break. And just while we're doing that, don't forget to submit your questions in the Q&A section. Some of you have already done it in the application, but if you've got more questions for Holly as we go, make sure you've submit them in the Q&A section. Now I see Beth's already done it, and if the rest of you also have more questions, please submit them. So sorry, you go ahead, Holly.
Sorry about that. I have a subcontractor in here that didn't know I was doing this in
our
house.
So
anyways, and so the way that this happened is people naturally wanted back. The natural born leaders within a larger organization rise up, and they will come and say, how can I help? And then you also give that out there into your community. We need people who are interested in helping to be a part of this. And also, it's not about them helping me. It's not about them being there to help and do, to serve us. They are serving those that need help. And through that, they are feeling the ownership of it. Okay. So the people that are working with me, they work within the constructs of what we are. So they are in partnership with me. Yes, I'm the founder, but they are my partner. They are it is in their blood just as much as it is in ours. And so it's almost like a family community that we have created for the leadership. And so that's really important. And it's the give back that they receive and the ownership that they feel in the work. And so the way I, all those years in the background of what I did with the pharmaceutical community, I always noticed that people will excel. They'll excel, but they will excel in the things that they are good at and what they understand. So for example, for me, I have no clue what somebody feels like if they are going through the loss of a child. And so the leader of our child loss group is someone who has lost her child due to a violent act even. She's the expert. I'm not the expert. So you empower the experts in areas that you don't understand. And so from a leadership perspective, if you don't understand something, if you aren't if you need to empower those people that do and give trust into those people. And so those are their groups. There is no would go to that person and say, you can no longer be a part of this, because they were the ones that built it to begin with. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And are they? You have different leaders running each
Yes.
group. Do you also have local kind of leaders as well who are doing these events and stuff in person?
Well, we have, our executive group has 6 members, and it has ranged up to like 8 or 10 members, and then it's shrank down to 5 or 6. But really, the way that this naturally occurred is based off the natural occurrence in grief. Believe it or not, it actually formed the way it was supposed to form intentionally. In other words, we started out with the grief, what we call Grief Anonymous Family Share. Okay, that encompassed everybody's grief and every type of grief. But then we were growing so fast, and the feed was going so fast, that people weren't getting the connectivity that they needed. And so then we knew the people who lost a spouse really needed to have the opportunity to talk directly to people who had lost spouses. See what I'm saying? So the dynamic of our program naturally designed so that we have the core family hub, and then we have loss of spouse group, loss of child group, loss of parent group. And so we have the core, and of the people in our executive staff, those people run the groups that they understand the best and are reflective of their own loss.
Okay, makes sense. We've had a few questions come in live, so I'll go to them quickly, and we'll dive into a bit more of your story. Francis has said, how has COVID-19 affected your community, and what's that experience been like for you?
You know, that is a very, very interesting. I love that you asked that question, Francis, because we are seeing the individual experience of loss being played out on a macro level. So we are actually seeing the body of humanity going through the epicenter of grief right now. And that is the loss due to life as we know it. Okay. Everything has changed for every person on this planet, whether that person is accepting of this or not. That is another factor of grief. Some people can accept it and some people can't. And they are going through this right now. Humanity is going through the epicenter of loss. Okay. We are going through a massive change. Okay. And how this is affecting people is a full. Everything in life is a spectrum. If people think that one particular sliver of an experience is reflective of the whole, that's the first example of where they're wrong. Okay. So some people in grief are going, this isn't even touching what I've been through. And I can handle this because I can handle the loss on a personal level that I've gone through. And I've already gone through the process of learning how to renew and build back my life again. And so those people are feeling actually more empowered because now they have learned from a personal standpoint how to rebuild. And now they're able to incorporate this next big challenge that comes into their life, which is, COVID. Okay. Now there's a whole, and we've reached millions of people, and we have a lot of this going on, but we haven't reached billions of people. We haven't reached hundreds of millions of people. So there's a lot of people out there who are lost, who are not only have not needed to cope with their own personal loss and their own personal new normal. Now that whole dynamic has even increased and intensified in a very, and I'm very worried about this side of the spectrum right now, okay? Because when there's no pill for grief, which there isn't, when there is no support community, which there is not for the most part, because most people are not able to gather in groups for the purposes of connect. Alcoholics Anonymous is going. Al-Anon is going through a crisis because they know that physical, personal, one-on-one connection is what was keeping them going. A lot of them. Okay, so this is in crisis from that angle, and so there is going to be a lot more suicides. There's a lot more people falling into addiction. There's a lot more families that are falling apart because they are having to face the trauma that they were going through, and now it's almost like they're encaged in it. And a lot of people are losing their jobs, losing their livelihoods, and so the spectrum is there from enlightenment all the way to complete devastation. And so what I see with Grief Anonymous is that we how timing of this is from a divine perspective, that we actually have this fully functioning, up and running, the platform designed, and we're ready to go. So I know that this is a God thing, that it's taken us 4 years to build it to this point, and now we are fully open, operational, and our whole goal is to go after those people who are truly lost, truly trapped, and their lives are falling apart. And I think the worst of it is in the aging communities that are being totally taken away from their families in nursing homes and extended care facilities, and they are the most acceptable to COVID. And so it's very worrisome, and I wake up every day with a huge, heavy heart in my body, knowing that our work has just begun. But I'm so glad we're where we're at now to get it so that we actually can do our work.
Yeah, that sounds like you guys are doing a really important job already, and you're primed to help even more people out during this global difficult time. So yeah, it sounds like you're doing really well. Just to let people know, sometimes your picture is cutting out, Holly. I think it's just sometimes a bit of a loose connection of some kind. But thankfully, so far your voice has been relatively steady. So just if anyone watching sees Holly cut out, it's not that she's upset to be here.
I can pick up my computer and I can move into a different room. I have no problem doing that.
I think it's as long as we've got your audio for now. I think that's the most important part. If that starts cutting out, maybe I'll ask you to do that. But for now, I think it's just okay. Okay, cool. So remember, anybody watching, if you want to put questions in the Q&A section, please do. Beth has asked a few, some of which you've covered already, which is, how do you meet your community where they are? You kind of mentioned that, you've got this big community of very diverse people. One way you've kind of met them where they are is to have separate subgroups for the people suffering with loss of a child, loss of a partner, stuff like that. Is there any other best practices you've had for kind of meeting people where they are, or kind of creating a level playing field for people when they enter your community?
I think, I have a very simple answer for that might seem like it's too simple, but it's really true, is that a lot of people think that goal setting is the way to go, that looking down into the future and you have a certain idea in mind of how you want it to be and you're going to work towards that. You have to keep a very open mind about the twists and the turns and the changes and the dynamics, because if you are not willing to look at those twists, turns, and dynamics as you there, you will see it only as failure. And that is not the case. If your ultimate goal is a big picture and you create a goal set. See, I think that's the one thing that, next year we want to be 20% bigger. And next year we want to have this, and this in place. And then if that doesn't happen, then you feel like you did something wrong. You feel like you failed, and that is never attainable. But what I have learned because that's how the pharmaceutical industry is. So I am classically trained as a person to set a goal and set parameters for the future as to what I want. What I've learned is I have done that over and over. I've done that in two major experiences in my life. One was with my husband and my goals, and that totally changed without warning, without anything of me having to do that. So I recognize this concept of the way that Western civilization has created a benchmark of what is successful and what is failure is an incorrect way of doing things. Okay. So when your ultimate goal is just to reach people and your heart is where it needs to be, then what you do is you take those steps, and as people, places, and events come to you, you learn it's either there for a lesson and to turn you in a lesson, not a failure, but a lesson, and turn you in the direction that you need to go while you keep your mindset on the ultimate goal, which is to truly help grieving people. Anytime that you get off on a tangent or you're going in a different direction that is not the ultimate goal is where you lose your way. Does that make sense? And then go ahead.
That makes total sense. And in fact, you're really speaking to me quite personally here, because if anything, in my career life, this is something I struggle with the most. It is this constant kind of trying to figure out what the right thing to do is, what the right next steps to get me somewhere. And I'm sure as community leaders and community professionals in this call, we've got like goals where we want our communities to go. But sometimes we get stuck in the minutia of like, what's next? How do you bring that together? Like this big goal of where you're trying to go and knowing what the next thing is to do in your community development and growth.
I think it's an aspect of focus and and keeping your eye on the prize, but allowing events in life to take place, because a lot of like I was saying, my husband died, and right in the middle, I was at the very top of my career. Okay, both of us were. He was everything, and then he's dead. So now I know that you can set all the goals you want. You can create all the things that you want to have occur, and something can come in and take you in a completely different way. And then, so now I've created Grief Anonymous, and we had everything working well online, and we were just at the point where we were going to start expanding our local program. I bought a restaurant on Route 66 in Wilmington, Illinois, that hosts that in a normal year, like 2 years ago, we had 150 to 250 people from foreign countries coming through our location every single day during the summertime. And so here I am. I'm like, okay, this is perfect. We are not only getting ready to start our local programs, but here we are. We've got all these major people, all the masses of crowds coming through. Our message is not going to just be spreading nationally. It's going to be spreading internationally. Then COVID hits. Okay, so this is another example of how all my dreams and all of my investments and all of my energy and all of my efforts have been wiped away. Because now I have a restaurant that is empty and has had to close down. Okay. And now I am not able to spread my local community groups anymore. And what we have are the foundation of our online support groups. Do I consider this a failure? No, I consider it's life. And so we all have to be prepared for major life changes. And as long as we are constantly, and this is a tenet with Grief Anonymous, it's practicing baby steps and leaps of faith. So I took that leap of faith, knowing that this is what was intended for me, for what God wanted for me, all the signs, everything that's happened, the success that we've had. And then all these things have stepped into place. And what I recognize is acceptance. We have to accept that there are going to be things that happen to some people, or not, but this one is happening and affecting everybody worldwide. So we're all in this together. So regardless of that fact, we're all having to adjust to this new normal. And so we all and still stay focused on the core, which is helping people or whatever your mission is, and just adjust to it. And if you are capable of change, if you're capable of adjustment, and you're capable of leading through that, knowing that you don't know all the answers. Nobody knows all the answers. Nobody's an expert in a pandemic. This is all new for all of us. So you have to be brave, and you have to believe in yourself, and make decisions that from the heart that are inclusive, and you'll be successful, and believe in the ripple effect. So a lot of people think, oh, I'm only helping 5 people. Well, what if the people that you were helping was Gandhi's mother, Mother Teresa's father, George Washington's parents, and you help that one person, what the ripple effect is for that. So you have to recognize that it's not about the numbers. It's not a number.
I love that. I mean, this is something I used to get quite crippled by. I had these huge, I think most of us do in our early 20s, these huge ambitions of how to kind of change the world. And I need to do this to feel like I'm a success, to kind of feel meaningful. And sometimes it's really easy to get lost in them. But actually, you're right. The strategy doesn't matter if you keep one core value, and yours is to help grieving people. And if mine can be, to help this type of person, then all the decisions come from there. No matter if it's like a big decision or a small decision, as long as that's kind of your guiding North Star, that's the most important thing, I guess.
And another thing is people feel very stifled by massive change and a loss of dreams. Okay, so if I was to, I have to struggle against feeling stifled right now. I have to struggle against my dreams being taken away from me, and I have to recognize the bigger picture about what this is about, and not lose sight of that, and work through it, and stay as long as you have core principles that you work from every single day, and stay focused on those while the chaos and the drama and all of these things are happening. you will be able to have the mindset to get through it. And that's
How did you?
that's what I'm doing every day right now. And I'm not saying that it's easy, but that's what I'm
Yeah,
doing.
for sure. I mean, this actually brings me on to a question that I wanted to ask you. I mean, everyone who's listening in, please feel free to keep asking questions. I've got a few more left from people who signed up. But one thing I really wanted to ask you, because I'm a bit of a philosophical person as it is, Holly. But I wanted to ask you this. Through your exposure to your husband's death, and especially through the exposure to the thousands and thousands of stories and experiences you've kind of had since then, how has it changed the way you see life and you see your own life and your own experience of the world and the place we live in?
It's been an awakening experience to me, and I'm going to be totally honest with you about it. I am a little bit, I by nature, I am a little bit naive, and I also believe in the goodness of all people. But what I have recognized is that, again, you have to apply the spectrum to everything. I
Mm-hmm.
am a full believer in the spectrum. Okay, and so what I have recognized is there are those people with good intentions. There are those people that are capable of working through and seeing the bigger picture. There are also those people out there who will fall and succumb to their fears and their anger and their
Mm-hmm.
despair, and it will pull them into a negative side. And I am forever hopeful that we are always, as a human race, always on the path to good things. I think that humanity is going through its biggest challenge ever, even bigger than World War II, which I think was the last time that one event impacted the entire world.
Yeah.
But what I do remember and what I do look at is the fact that we did get through it. We did overcome it, and we did come back together, and there was a golden age from that experience of World War II. And what I think people don't realize is when you have these massive cataclysmic events, such as a world war, that they're coming from the ashes of that is grief.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the level of grief after World War II is unbelievable. I mean, if you think about 800, what was it? How many people died?
I'm not sure.
Some astronomical millions of people. The fallout from that, the grief from that, the rebuilding, it shaped our society. Okay, there was so much trauma, so much grief, so much loss, that grief, the way that Western world defines grief, is to look away from it, to put it away, to move forward, to get your bootstraps on and march forward, because there was so much of it. And what happened with that is that there was a dynamic of the closing of communication and the understanding of it. Okay. And so that was actually the grief side of this was actually negatively impacted by war.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we are going through COVID, and COVID is negatively affecting the world. But my hope is, because of humanity growing and becoming more intelligent, more enlightened, I'm hopeful and naive to believe that, down the road, that we will actually overcome this and become
Yeah.
better for it. You have to believe that. If you don't believe that, and if you will become a part of the problem, and you will be investing in the dark side of what is to come. And so there are people that are in that vein, and that is what there just needs to be more people thinking positively and doing positive things from this in order for us to overcome that. And then we'll just have to see where that shakes
Agreed,
out.
agreed. And I think everyone here on this call would also agree the fact that, we're all trying to do a positive thing in the world, right? We're all trying to stay optimistic, and especially community is the most important thing in this time. It is bringing communities together. And right now, that's not always offline because we can't, but online is really important to make sure our loved ones are as close as possible. Francis helps us out here. He said it's approximately 70 to 85 million people who perished during World War II, which is a ridiculous figure.
I thought
Yeah,
so. I thought it was 80 million people that perished. Now, can you imagine that? And it's not only that those people died, but think about the families and the living impact that had from that experience, and the anger that came from that, and the decisions that were made because of it. But you look at like the United States and the kumbaya that happened between the United States and Japan. You know, it can
yeah.
be
And I mean,
overcome, and you look for
like you
those
said, if it's
examples.
80 million people, let's say, who died, let's say it's just two parents of the person who died, that's already 160 million people who are affected from grief from that experience alone. And obviously, it's probably much, much more because there are friends and other family members involved too. So, like you said, a huge proportion of the world were grieving at that time. Um, taking
Yep.
taking a little bit of a step back to practicalities for a second, because we had a few questions about just your own life. From this call alone, you've actually
Hmm.
expressed that you've got an amazing like restaurant, which is a Route 66, which I did a little bit of digging earlier on. It looks incredible. So everyone should check that out if possible. It's called the Launching Pad, isn't it? Launching
Yes, we have the. I'm the owner of the
Pad.
Gemini Giant, and the Gemini Giant is a spaceman. He's a fiberglass spaceman that was created back in the early days in the 50s and 60s. They were creating these muffler men that were statues that were sitting out in front of muffler dealerships. Okay, and the muffler dealership went out of business, and so International Fiberglass had like 200 of these statues, and so they put them on flatbed trucks and they started selling them all over the United States. And the Corlicks, who were the original family owners back in the 50s and 60s of this restaurant, bought the Gemini, what they called the Gemini Giant, and he was a unique muffler man that
Mhm.
looks like a spaceman, and he's green and he has a helmet and he's holding a rocket, and he became internationally known once Route 66 developed as a tourist destination in the United States. More people around the world know about Route 66 and it actually being a tourist destination than Americans ourselves, believe it or not. And so he's one of the top 10 attractions on Route 66, and people come from all over the world to get their picture made with him. And right next to him was this dilapidated restaurant that fell into disrepair once the family sold it because they didn't have anyone to perpetuate it. And my partner, who's also a widower, came along and we saw this. And I knew that I had been struggling so long to try and find the perfect paradigm to start the first anonymous, that I knew that I wanted to do this. But with also my background in restaurant industry for 10 years, I knew that this was what the whole dynamic of what this could be about would be the launching pad for the work that we're doing for the
Gotcha.
world. And so that's the reason why I bought it, and we totally reconstructed it. We totally got the rest. It looked like a Jurassic Park scene where everybody dropped their stuff and ran out, and the velociraptors, took over. And there was water coming down. There was still grease in the fryers
Lovely.
after 5 years sitting dormant. It was disgusting, and so we had to. It was almost like this restaurant was a metaphor for our lives, that it once had a wonderful experience and a good run, and then something happened to it and it fell into disrepair and
Yeah.
it was about to be torn down. And that's what Tully and I thought, that's what our lives feel like. And we're going to rebuild that, because I think the way to move forward in grief and the way to move forward in trauma and loss is to start creating new good
Yeah.
memories. Okay. So not only are you experiencing a positive experience, but then you have something positive to look back on that is post loss. And that's how you start growing and start getting better and better. Is that's how you start learning from the loss. That's how you start using it as a launching pad
Hmm.
for your new life. So there's so many metaphors to this, and it became an unbelievable success. We were in the Chicago Tribune a bunch of times. We're in magazine covers. And I'm not saying this from an ego standpoint. It was almost like it happened to us, not that we bought it thinking all that was going to happen. We actually didn't really even understand the Route 66 community when we bought it. I bought
Yeah.
it for Grief Anonymous. But that's why I'm saying that sometimes horrible things can happen, but sometimes you can win an emotional and
Yeah.
physical lottery by
Yeah.
crying. So, and you'll miss out on those opportunities if you don't
Yeah,
take
I
that
think
leap of faith.
if people can take anything today, is that it's like, terrible things can happen, and they will happen inevitably, and that's going to happen. But what comes afterwards is also going to be beautiful. There's always beauty which follows winter. There's always summer there's always spring that follows winter, right? It's just about getting through winter.
Mm-hmm.
My question to you was, already you've discussed this Grief Anonymous and Grief Anonymous network, or whatever it was called.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Grief
That's it.
Resource Network. Uh-huh.
This restaurant now, you're a mum as well. There's lots of other things which happen in life. Somebody's question was like, what are some of the self-care practices you've adapted as part of balancing your work, and also creating, a safe and healthy and happy life for yourself? How do you kind of practice self-care?
So I love that thank you for asking that question. And I'm going to go back to a conversation that I had this weekend with a beautiful elderly Jewish woman who was who grew up in New York, and now she's living in Florida. And I'm going to say, from self-care perspective, for people who are truly in the epicenter. So all of us are in this epicenter right now of grief, in terms of the life that we have lost, in terms
Yeah.
of the life we know it. And so the number one thing that we say to people is, and this is at the core, when if you are frozen, if you can't get off your couch, if you are feeling very overwhelmed with the reality of what you're going through, you have to compartmentalize your day. And B, you have to get close to the
Mm-hmm.
elementals of life, where there is no answer, where there is nothing but what is. And when I say that, I mean that you have to. This gets into our tenets. So that, and it is about self-care. So the first three tenets. Number one is connecting to a higher power consciousness. So that means whether it's your faith, whether it's your religion, whether it's just your personal self and your emotional electricity that's going on in your head, you have to connect with that. Okay. Number two is find or create a
Mm-hmm.
sanctuary for healing. So instinctually, in the very beginning, I needed a safe place to go. And that is why, when you amplify that out into a human perspective, you have to see that's why there's meditation gardens. That's why there are churches. That's why there are beautiful paths on a walk. That's why so many people, like in South America, will build an altar or a little space where
Yeah.
they go and grieve and pray through their faith for their loved ones. You have to create a sanctuary in your life, whatever that is. That's why we are open-ended in our discussions. We don't tell people specifics on what to do. We just use like lens,
Yeah.
like where are
Yeah.
your glasses where you can't to see out. So that's what these tenets are about. And then the third one is focusing on the physical fundamentals of sleep, diet, and exercise. And that doesn't mean go run a 5K and then start a new diet and then it's not that. It's go out and walk to the end of your driveway and back for your exercise. Go into the kitchen and make yourself a sandwich, or go through a drive-through and get some food in your body. People who have been married for 50 years and they lose their loved one, they can't even walk
Yeah.
in their bedroom because they can't sleep in their bed that they shared with the same person and raised a family. This is trauma. That's why I'm saying this is at the core. Okay. So when I say get close to the elementals, on top of the three top tenets that I just discussed with you, get next to fire. If you can build yourself a fire pit. Why is it that everybody in humanity loves to sit around a fire?
Yeah.
There's just something about it that is core to our human life. Fire represents the ability to survive. Okay. That's where, in the very beginning, the cavemen, once they discovered fire, that changed everything in the dynamic of the
Mm-hmm.
human experience, did it not? Okay, so get close to fire. So I built a fire pit in my backyard, and I would go out there for hours because there's no
Yeah.
answers. Nobody's going to
Yeah.
come and say, this is what you need to do, and then you're going to feel better. That's not what this is about, because it doesn't happen that way. We can't wake up tomorrow and wish
Yeah.
COVID away. You can't bring your loved one back to life again. So that's why I'm saying the elementals. Another example of what I told this lady that I would do is, I was physically feeling so much pain, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, from the loss of my husband, that I had to have somewhere where the pain could go. So I had to envision, and this actually comes from my dialysis days, believe it or not, knowing that a peritoneal dialysis is where they put a salt solution in your body, and it leaches out the toxic toxins and the impurities, and then they take the dialysate out, and that in and of itself does the same job as the kidneys does. So I thought to myself, I'm going to get in my bath water, which is a fundamental aspect of life. You cannot survive without water, okay? And I would visually think my pain, my physical pain, my emotional pain is leaching out of my body through the salt water with Epsom salt, and it is in this bath water. My pain is in this bath water. And then what I would do is I would turn the drain, I would open the drain up, and I would watch this water go down into the drain, and I would think my pain is going down the drain. And if I just keep doing this, then I will start emotionally and feel better. And believe it or not, it worked.
It is.
Okay.
Sometimes it really is just to see that, to have some kind of way to visualize the pain and the toxins leaving you. Sometimes that visually can help you feel a lot better as well.
And then I would go on a walk. And as I was walking in the forest, I was looking at shoots coming up, beautiful little flowers blooming. I was seeing that, but then I was also seeing trees that had lived out their life expectancy, and they were decaying, and they were coming back down into the ground. And so I was seeing the cycle of life throughout looking at nature, which also brings you into the fundamentals of sleep, diet, and exercise, which is the exercise of getting out and connecting with nature. And so, and then I would feel the wind, and I would realize that the wind of change happens to everyone. And so from that fundamental aspect of our physical existence on this earth, I was able to realize that I am just a part of the whole, and this is a part of the process. And I did not get to live out my life the way I thought. And I have an 11-year-old son that's at home grieving his daddy, and now I'm living this life, and I have to accept that this is the cycle of life. And is it interrupted? No. Guess why? Because we are never promised this whole concept of that you have a successful life if you can live to the age of 90. No, that's not what this is about. That's not what life is about. That's not the way life works. And if we are keeping ourselves in that dynamic that it's a failure if you don't get to live out a true physical life expectancy, then you are going to live in that loss and that pain of not being able to do that. But when you look over into what life truly is like for other living things, you realize that that's not the case either. And then you start to have what's called, that's another part of our tenets, is acceptance, or coming to the place of acknowledgement of your loss. And so when you live in the paradigm of acceptance, then things start to become a lot easier for you to bring in what's really happening, such as COVID. So now that I have gone through this it isn't just an acceptance of loss, but it's an acceptance of your new normal. And while you're creating that new normal, you have to work on what you are authentically about, which is tenet 9, embracing your new authentic self. So while all of us are going through this process, you're redefining your parameters, what you're willing to accept, what you're willing to not accept. Everything's changing, so you have to kind of work through that, and you might as well do it in a way that is going to bring joy to you, the way that you're going to get the toxicity out of your life, whether it's relationships or experiences or a job or whatever. Grief brings you to that doorway of you being not able to tolerate certain things because your cup is full, and you can't create any more fullness from something that's already full.
Makes sense.
And that's going to spill off. And so whatever's in your cup is your decision. And whatever you're willing to accept is your decision. So that's where free will and choice come into play. And you really are the master of your universe if you are able to see this cognizantly and make the decisions for it and decide what you want.
I love that. And I love that it's very humbling, that life isn't just as people expect, right? It's not just that one long line and you become 90 and that's it. It is you can't ignore the pain in life or you haven't got life at all. It's either one, you can't have both, right? Life can be pain, life will be pain.
Right.
It's inevitable. We're pretty much at an hour, so I will start wrapping up. I think we've been through all the questions which were submitted beforehand and everybody who's answered and asked here. Is there anything that you would like to share just before we wrap up, Holly?
Just that I guess whatever your work is and whatever your mission is, just do a an inventory, do a gratitude list. Think about what you're grateful for. Think about and that I guess that's what I'd like to end with is
Yeah,
the gratitude list. Because that's the other thing that I worked directly with this lady about is when you're at that level where you're having to get close to the elementals just to be able to survive, that's where the flickers
yeah,
of gratitude grow. And when you and they're almost like foundation building blocks. Gratitude is your foundation building block. And if you go to a person who has just now lost a child due to cancer and you've seen massive pain and trauma, and you're asking why, and you're going through all this anger and hurt and feeling betrayed by the world and betrayed by God, betrayed by whatever your belief system and everything, you're going to need to find those flickers of gratitude, because if you've hit rock bottom and you're only way up, then you have to look
yeah,
for those little lights, the little things. And then from that, not only recognize it, but then be grateful for it. And then as you continue, and you have to say thank you. You have to say thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you that I have bath water. Thank you that I'm able to
yeah,
stare into a candle of fire if I
yeah.
can't build a fire pit. And as you grow in this gratitude, that is the basic fundamental building blocks to moving your
I
life
love
in a
that.
new direction. So that's why I'm saying I am. I mean, I'm great. Yeah, my whole life again has been collapsed in certain ways, but I can either look at that or I can look at, wow, we have the online community that is still accessible to everybody, and
Yeah.
here I am talking to you.
I love
That
that.
is my
That's something we can
gratitude.
practice every day of our lives, right? I try to do it every morning. I have this short meditation time, whether it's 10 or 15 minutes every day, and I finish that with about 5 minutes of gratitude. And it's, I have like a list of things I run through. Some of it's every single day, some of it's stuff which happened the day before, some of it's happening right now. And it is beautiful. It gives you a certain perspective about the day ahead that no matter what happens, I don't know, you've achieved. You're here. You're breathing. It's fantastic.
And there's one other thing that I'd like to share with everybody that is a human concept right now that is truly taking hold from a grief perspective. I actually have it written behind me, but it
Uh-huh.
wasn't meant for this. But but it's about facing your fears, because right now everybody's going through a lot of fear as to where am I at now? Where is this going? What is happening? Because there's so much chaos and turmoil in the world. And the number one thing I say to people is if you write it down, then you will actually be able to navigate it better, because you take it from an overwhelming sense of the
Yeah.
intangible and you put it in tangible form. And then it can go in two ways. It can go in what you know is going to happen and what you are worried about might happen. And then you make yourself a list of what's going to happen, and then write yourself a game plan out, find an online community, find a positive focus, such as the
Yeah.
elementals, doing self-help, self-care, all of those things while you work through this. And then you write out a list of irrational fears, which right now is a rational thing to do, because irrationality in this fear is a legitimate concern. And then write out all of those irrational fears, and then kind of put something positive that you know that you can do to feel better. And then once you conquer that fear and you have all of this written down, then you're more able to go out and tackle the things. It's getting outside of the elementals and compartmentalizing your day. I didn't really go into that, but what that means is don't think about what's
Yeah.
happening next week. Don't think about what's happening 2 months from now. Compartmentalize your day and what you can do today that will make you feel better. And so that these incremental steps once things do change or a new dynamic happens, you've done all the work up until that point and you would be ready for
I
that
love that.
change.
And even just, I'm somebody who writes a lot down anyway. I've got lots in my head. When it's in your head, there's no beginning and there's no end. It can be cyclical. It goes round and round in circles. Whereas when it's written down, eventually you're like, okay, I'm just repeating myself now. There is a beginning and there is an end, and it helps you to really understand what is going on in your head. Okay, Holly, we'll wrap it up there. It's been an hour. I don't want to spend any more of your time, which I know is very limited. But thanks so much for taking the time out. This will be recorded, or it's been recorded, like I said, and you might see a blog post about our chat as well. And I'll keep you in the loop.
That's wonderful. And I will put it in all of our platforms.
That'd be amazing. Thank you so much, Holly. And I'll speak to you very soon. Thanks, everyone who joined us. Some have left already, some are still here. Thank you, and I'll speak to you soon, Holly. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.